role of web server. Last session, I told you the detailed information how server is going to handle, how to configure the servers that we will see. Actually, for server, we need two modules. So one is HTTP, another one is HTTP status codes. We need to install these two modules, HTTP and HTTP status codes. After installing the modules, we need to configure, create, and handle the server. So we will see a simple example, how we can configure the server, how we can start the server, configuring and starting the Node.js server. Let me give you a simple program here. Of a jar, two packages we need to install, and the packages that we need to install from the terminal. So cd server and two packages, npm install http. One package we need for http, another one http status code. So we already installed these two, http and http status code. Now, after installing the packages, we need to import the packages here. So first step, import HTTP modules. What are the HTTP modules? We need to import them. So one is HTTP. I will give this. We can import by using require. Require. So which module to import? HTTP module. So it will load this module into memory. Means all the library of HTTP is loaded into memory. And that you can access by using this variable reference. So by using HTTP. Now, one more important, we need HTTP status codes. Status codes for displaying different status. So we have to create HTTP status. And the HTTP status, so it requires, so HTTP status codes module. We need to import HTTP status codes module. So that is the two modules we need to import. After importing the module, so next we need to create server. To create server, the HTTP module will provide a create server method. It will provide a create server method. So generally, by using the create server method, you can create a server. So what we are doing is, we are creating an application. Into this application memory, so we are loading http.create server. So create server uses a callback function. We need to define a callback function. This callback function is going to handle two objects. server is always going to handle two objects. One is the request object, another response object. You can give any name. I'm giving reasonable names. So you can give any shortcut name because these are formal parameters, but you can give any name, but the first parameter is a request and second parameter is response. Now, what is the purpose of request object and response object? Already I explained previously. Request object is used to fetch any information from client. If any data is coming from client, to get the data, we use request. If server have to send anything to client, that is through response object. We have two important objects, request object and response object. Now through response object, we need to send a response. So to send response, so we need various response status codes. We need various response status codes. Actually, so what are the various response status codes? Already in AJAX concept, I told you. So various response status codes we send. So let me give you detail here, means how we can configure and creating the server. So that means the detail option here, how we manage. So before this notes here, let me give a detailed one here. Yeah. Let's say creating a web server. Creating a web is to create web server. So Node.js HTTP module provides create server method. So that creates a local HTTP server. So what is the responsibility of HTTP server? The local server is responsible for handling the request and the response from client, handling the request and response from client. So request from client, you simply say that handling request from client and response to client, right? It is responsible for handling these two functionalities, request and response, all this local server. So it is created by using create server method. So technically, syntactically, let me give a syntax here first. Syntactically, so we have to define http dot create server, and it uses a callback function. This callback function uses request and response object. So this is the callback function, the request and response object. So request object so is to fetch data from client, and the response object is to send response to client. So that is request and response object. Now here Generally, response header comprises of two details. So response header comprises of two details. Comprises of details, two important details. One is status code. Another one is content type. It will contain two details, the status code and content details. Response header comprises of two details, status code and content type. So what is the status code? What is the status code? So what are the various status codes? So the various status codes. So used by HTTP server. What are the various status codes used by HTTP server? We need to define the status codes, and these are the different status codes. Already in jQuery Ajax, I given you those codes here. These are the various error status codes. Let me give you this diagram to you. So this table to you. These are the various status codes. For different purpose, different status codes. 100 indicates continue. 200 indicates OK. That means if the request is OK and the response is successful, then we use 200. If a request is for something which is not available, then we will say not found 404. If the request is from some unauthorized user, then we will say unauthorized. That means 401. So these are different status codes that server uses to tell the different status messages to the client, that whether his request is successful or not, is there any problem in that request. We use these status codes. These are different status codes. And next important is, so we need to understand the content types. So content types. So there are various content types. Technically, there are various content types. These are status codes. Content type is nothing but actually. So the content type is used to indicate the media type of the resource. The content type is used to indicate the media type of resource. Media type means already you know. So media types are nothing but MIME types. That means what kind of content you are sending. That is defined as content type. So usually, so the content types can be various types. Content type is usually a media type, and the content type can be various types. Usually, depending on what type of content you are sending. It can be generally the response usually that sent as response usually in applications. If you are sending the content type as HTML, means different media types you need to understand. So already you know the types are defined by using. So the types are defined by using type concept. So there are various content types. It can be application type, it can be audio type, it can be image type. It can be text type. So like, so it can be like text slash plain. So plain, it is just a plain text. So it can be like text slash HTML. So that means it is sending a HTML. It can be not only that, it can be like multi-part form data, form data. It can be multi-part form data. It can be even message slash partial. Various content types will be available. Various content types available. It can be like application type. Application, we use octet stream actually, stream. So these are different content types. So it can send a text CSS file. It can send HTML file. It can send a JavaScript. Already we know some types which already we used. So these are various types of content types. It can be JSON type. So image types. So many content types, because a response can be to anyone. A response can be to anyone. So here response specifies what kind of response you are sending. It indicates what kind of response you are sending. So the common HTTP types, so we have like, so generally response regularly expected as HTML. So plain HTML type of response is expected. So if you are sending a HTML response, then HTML. A plain text, then you have to define plain. These are the various content types. So whenever you are sending a response, so syntactically, the response must be defined in this way. That means we need to configure the response in this way. Response dot write head. That means it will write the response header. So in this, so we need to first define the status code. We need to define the status code. And after that, we need to configure the options. In the options, we define the content type. So in the options, we define the content type. What type of content you are sending. We have to define the content type. Here we have to use the MIME type of the content. This is how generally we send the response header. So based on what kind of message we are sending, so we have to define that message. That means content, you have to define that. So it is HTML, then you have to send HTML content. It is text, you have to send the plain text content. That's how generally we need to configure the request. So we need to configure the request and define that response for that request. So here, what we are doing now is, after creating the server, we are preparing the response header. That means we have to use response.write head. We are using the response header. So write head, it will write. So here it is expecting status code number. Status code number we will get from HTTP status. HTTP status is an module that contains all the status codes. From the status codes, we will get OK as the status code. We will get OK as the status code. So that means the status code OK indicates that response is OK. Response is OK. We can use this HTTP status code. So it is saying that it is deprecated from the latest versions. So you use some 200, it's okay, no problem. So here the status code that you are sending, this HTTP status codes. So OK will get the status code of 200 and it will return. So the current debugger is using some latest debugger, it is saying that better use the code number. It's okay. It's fine for us. It is saying that better use the code number and handle it. But OK will return the code number. We know that we will use that now. And we need an object. This object should use, so content type. It should define the content type. So it should use the content type. What is the content type? Content type. Content type, it should send what kind of content? Text, HTML. That is the response we need to send. So response we need to define. So this is how we configure the response header. Okay, after the response header, we need to design the response message. Let create, so a response message. So response message. And this response message contains some heading. So welcome to Node.js. That is the response message with some HTML. Because the content type is HTML, response message will be HTML. We are configuring the response message. And this response message must be returned to the browser. That means now this response message should be sent as a response. So that means we have to use response.write method, response.write. So response.write. So what is the code you need to write? You need to tell the code you need to write. So this response.write. So it will send this response message. Response message will be sent. We are configuring the response message. So we are defining the remember later we can send a separate HTML file as response. Currently here we are designing some HTML code and adding this code to the page browser. But we can send a separate HTML page as response, which we will see that how we can send a separate HTML page as response. So this is the response configured, the response defined. Now once the response is ready, so now the server need to start on particular port number. Then we have to use app.listen. Listen is the method. That means server starts listening to your request. And once client makes the request, it will listen to that request. And it will send a response. Listen on which port number? You can give any port number. Suppose I am giving some 3000 as port number. Our default port number 8080. On that particular port number it is running. So some different port number, some 3000 port number. Okay, now configuring it. Now we need to show the status. By using console.log, we said server started. That is enough actually. But better to show them where server started, on which port number, which URL. We need to get that and display. So better use that. So then what we will do is server started. And here we will keep http://127.0.0.1:. So 3000, that is the port number actually. We need to just show the help that server started at that particular port number. So that means it is listening to that particular port number and configuring the port number. So that is how the server is configured, how the server is defined. So configured and defined. Now let's run this and see. So let's run this and see. So when we open the terminal, we need to compile node web server.js. If everything is fine, then it says server started. server started on this particular location. Server started on this particular location. So once the server started on this particular location, so what we can do, we can open the browser and make the request here. So make the request here. So how we can configure the request? So let's see. So you have HTTP : so 127.0.0.1 and port number 3000, that is the port number, and it gets the message and display. That means the request is successful and it is displaying it. And you can see that the response from that is coming successfully. Now, very important, if you don't start this, so suppose Control C, it is terminated. So then the rest, when I refresh this again, then it is unable to reach. It is unable to reach because we have to make sure that the server is started. So we need to start the server. So once the server is started, then it is ready. So it is ready. So we can start interacting with it, or we can start managing everything. So this is generally how we configure and define. So that means it is going to handle the interactions only when the server is started. So make sure that the server is started and you refresh and it will get the response and it will display. So we have to make sure that the request is defined and the response is configured, right? So once this is done, now we need to understand how we can handle various other options. We need to understand so how we can manage various other interactions. That means how Node.js uses various other interactions. This is the basic request and response, how it manages. Actually, to handle these kind of interactions, this is Node.js server. Node.js using a server. But in real world, one major problem you will face with this Node server is already we learned that it is single-threaded. Due to single-threaded nature, so the Node server cannot manage multiple requests simultaneously at the same time with a lot of interactions. It can broadcast the information to multiple users. So, but interactions will be difficult. That is the reason, generally what we do is, instead of using the Node server directly, we actually use a middleware. That middleware is responsible for configuring the server and handling multiple requests from the clients and managing multiple requests from the client. So from multiple clients, multiple requests, so better to use a middleware, not directly this Node server. Initially, this is okay. You may be worrying about where this write head content types are displayed. Write head and content types are displayed, where these content types are being displayed. Actually, the content types, the configuration of these types and defining the content types, these are displayed, you can see when we start in the browser. Let's start this server again. We are starting the server again. And let's make a request here. And you can see here, so we can use local host also. Local host and port number is 3000. local host and port number is 3000, it will get that. You can directly use that local host. That is our IP address default 1270 and all. Now once you make here, so go to inspect. In the inspect, go to network category. And now once refresh this, make a fresh request for this. And once the request comes for this, so once the request comes from this, that means the request is successful and the response is successful here. So what is the request type? What is the response type? So what kind of content is received? Everything will be displayed here. You can see here, the status code is 200. And the type is shown as a document. Type is shown as a document. By default, it is shown as a document. But actually you see here, the request URL is localhost this. The request method is get. Status code is okay. Status code is okay. And you can see content type. It is sending the content type. So text HTML. Content type contains, response header contains lot of details, as I told you. So it can contain, so connection, it can contain content type, it can contain date, encoding, so many details. Usually you can see the request header. The request header, so these are the request header. This is the request header. Current request header is this. Content type is this. You can send different types of content to the different types of content as a response. This, all these details you can see in the debugger in network category, you can find that. So now here, so one more important is you need to understand how it can send different types of content as a response. For example, currently it is sending, let's terminate this, Control C to stop. Let me give you this program first. So already I given, but here one more extra status codes also we are using. So first to handle this program, what you have to do, so make sure that you installed these packages. Already we installed those packages. So the above I given already. Once you install, not required every time. So webserver.js. So in this, so let me give you this recent program I have created. And this is the recent program we defined. Okay, this is the latest with all the status code and everything is configured here. Now, suppose we are configuring the content types and defining the content type here. I will say, so it is text JSON type. The content type is a text JSON type. And the response message is not HTML. Response message is not HTML now. So the response message is not HTML. So what we are creating temporarily, so we are creating a variable, or we are creating a constant. The constant is products. And this constant contains some initialization. So products name, some TV, and some price. So some price. We are defining this. And some name, some night casuals. Okay, some price and the price. So we are defining some details as a constant. Later, we will learn how we can get the details. So from database, because already we created a database, we will learn how to manage that and how do we define that. Initially, this is the data. And now response message. So we are sending this response message. So that response message contains the data that is products. It contains the products. And we are sending that response message JSON type. So this is JSON type data. This is the JSON type data. The content type is JSON and we are sending a JSON type data. This is a JavaScript array object notation. We are sending this specific type of data. Right. Usually, so technically, you see here when we start this now. So node web server, it is started. Let's make a request here. So I'm making the request local host and 3000. And here, so the response for this usually, so the response for this you can see. So it says that localhost refused to connect. So there is some problem in the connection. So there is some problem in the connection. You can see the detailed message here. So it is, you can see it is showing some detail error message here. It is said that the first argument must be a string type instance of buffer. So, but it received an instance of array. It received as instance of an array. That means it is saying that, so it is saying that the content what you want to do is correct. So, but this is not the content is okay, but this is not the right way to send the response JSON type, because it is content type is JSON. Okay, that's no problem. We have the content also in a JSON type. But when you are sending some content in a JSON form, we need to use JSON parsers, translators to convert the data into that type. Because browsers cannot directly understand, we need to translate it, parser, response details. Browser can understand plain HTML, browser can understand even JSON also, but it requires the JSON is dynamic data. It needs to parse the data. HTML text related data are not dynamic data, so it doesn't need to parse the data. And it needs to parse the data. It needs to parse the data. So by using that parsing techniques, so by using that events binding technique, it can emit the value and it can send the value. That means actually you generally need an event handling. You generally need some parsing techniques to understand, to send this kind of data. For example, if it is not, so JSON, see here, if it is text plain, I'm giving just plain. And here we are displaying some message. So it is, so welcome to Node.js. That is just plain text message. That is the plain text message. So let me compile this again. So, and the server started. And once I refresh this, this time we are sending some plain text message. We are configuring and sending some plain text message. That means the plain text format is sent as response, to the client request. So it is taking a while, right? So it should get the plain text response and display the plain text response, just like how it has displayed the plain HTML. So that means the response for text, so you don't have any error. It is taking a little while time, right? So sometime it is taking fine. So the point here is you can send plain contents. You can send HTML contents. So, but you cannot send some dynamic content, some data. For that, generally, in order to send such contents, in order to send any contents, so complex data like images and all this, you need to understand. So you need to understand. So how to manage. So Node.js, in Node.js, how do we manage event looping, event loops? Actually, why we need event looping? Because Node.js applications are single-threaded. So it requires, because it has to read the data from a file, it has to send the data from the file, That means it has to perform multiple activities in the background when user makes a request. That means it has to use callback mechanism. Through the callback mechanism, it has to handle certain functionalities and send those functionalities as a response, multiple functionalities. That means reading the data from JSON and returning the data. So all these activities need to be performed in a sequential order. So for that, we need to define event handling. We need to configure the event handling. So Node.js requires events. So Node.js requires event looping. Why it requires event looping? Because it is single threaded. So many problems will come in single threaded. Actually, this will not be a problem if it is multi-threaded, because it can perform several tasks simultaneously. So it needs some events to handle so that it can manage multiple requests and send response to that request. So technically, Node.js applications so are single threaded. They are single threaded. Node.js applications are single threaded. So they use event driven model. Actually, they use event driven model. We call this as event driven model. They use event driven model. So technically, so you have to manage multiple tasks by using sync and async techniques, which are also called as blocking and unblocking techniques. So we have to learn this blocking and unblocking techniques. We have to learn about these blocking and unblocking techniques. You have to manage multiple tasks by using synchronous and asynchronous techniques. Blocking and unblocking technique. What is synchronous and asynchronous technique? So without that, we cannot handle multiple tasks like reading the files, sending the JSONs and all. Actually, sync uses blocking technique. So sync uses blocking technique where it will not allow so any another task to perform until the given task is completed. That is synchronous technique. Async uses unblocking technique. So where it will allow any another task along with the given task. So this is synchronous and asynchronous techniques. We have to learn how to handle these synchronous and asynchronous techniques. How do we manage these synchronous and asynchronous techniques in Node.js? Because these techniques allows to handle multiple tasks and handle various types of requests and send response to those requests. For this, we need to understand few examples with synchronous and asynchronous techniques. That means writing the events and managing the events for the application. So how do we handle the events? For that, we need a special library again. We need to install the library, configure the library, and handle these interactions. So that we will see in our next session, right? Tomorrow we will see about that. So first, tomorrow, once let me know, all of you able to create server, configure server, and handle it. Because several people will face the issues in configuring and creating. If you face any problem in servers, we cannot continue the next step programs. That is the reason first you need to create and configure, right? You need to create and configure. Yeah, second one is async. Okay, I will give that. Up to this, so you were successfully able to install and practice. Am I right? Up to this, everyone is able to successfully install and practice, right? Node.js server. Up to Node.js server, everything is ready now. Because from here, whatever the programs are there, they become complicated. So that means we need to connect with database, retrieve the data, server sides, a lot of interactions we need to design. If anything is not working, immediately tell me. Otherwise, you cannot handle this. Okay, na? So now tomorrow we are going to learn very complex things. How we can connect with the database, get the data from the database, return the data in a JSON form and send that data as a response. We are going to understand about the communication with the database. Okay, that is a very big option to understand. Tomorrow we will discuss about that. No? Right. Response.end is not mandatory every time, but it is good to use. Okay, na? Because by default it ends the response.